630 WPRO and 99.7 FM.
Well, there is proof that the trains run on time. I'll tell you that in a minute. Abbey Roofing is a sponsor of this broadcast as well today. If your roof is leaky, Abbey Roofing specializes in emergency roof repairs for commercial buildings and residential homes. They were on my roof the other day. Call Abbey Roofing now at 783-0033. That's 783-0033. Early. I didn't expect them to about quarter of. The trains are running on time?
They are.
I
actually got on the wrong train this morning when I left New York City. So.
It's good to have you, man. This is Joe Williams, folks. He is from the Democrats for Education Reform, which is, to some, maybe an oxymoron. And I think that's probably part of the marketing that you're doing. If you take a look at the website, folks, there's kind of a direct intra perspective on Democrats on it to say, you know what? Republicans, whatever. It's a multi-party problem and a multi-party solution. But we really haven't been very intellectually honest with what our mission statement is supposed to be, which is to take care of the everyday people on the planet and make sure they're well educated. It's kind of part of your message, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we're trying to say that one of the reasons that people in the last decade have come to believe that Democrats don't really stand for anything anymore is because we really don't. We've been fighting some bizarre battles. And in public education, this has got to be at the top of our agenda. We think that if the cornerstone of our democracy is going to be able to rest on public education for the next 100, 150 years, we have an obligation to make sure that it is much stronger than it is right now.
Let's set the table for those who've kind of parked themselves, and I hope you have rearranged your lunchtime for this conversation. Joe's going to be here through 1:30 when he's got to skedaddle up to the State House and take some meetings, and we'll see what he can tell us about what his plans are today. But you're kind of a nationally known guy. You've been a nationally recognized award-winning journalist for the New York Daily News, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. I'm reading, of course, a non-resident senior fellow from the Washington-based think tank Education Sector. You wrote a book called Cheating Our Kids, How Politics and Greed Ruin Education. You live in New York. Tell me, other than that bio sketch, what you're about, what this organization is about, how long it's been around, whether it has any impact, or is it another one of these talking head types of blah, blah, blah types of vapor type producing organizations?
Well, I mean, that's the last question's a matter of debate. There's some people that think that we are running on fumes. But it's our experience when we started this about 3 years ago was that for a long time, if you were interested in talking about education reform and you were a Democrat, you kind of had to know a secret handshake. You had to sort of, be able to sort of whisper, because it was not considered polite as a Democrat to suggest that our public schools could be better. We felt that we were ceding the issue to Republicans. We actually were allowing Republicans to look like they were much stronger on education reform than they really were. And we tended to believe in our gut that when you got down to it, it's really Democrats that ought to own this issue. And we're talking particularly about urban education nationally as being the focal point for the problem. But that's just the low-hanging fruit. Our entire national education system is in need of a revamp, as we're starting to see around the country. And as you started to see, particularly in the last 5 years or so, as some of the groups around the country, like Teach for America and other sort of groups that were attracting young idealists, Democrats who were really viewing their mission in life to close the achievement gap that exists in schools between the haves and the have-nots. And they're all Democrats, and they're all in on this sort of cutting-edge education reform stuff, and there was no home for them within the Democratic Party. What we've been trying to do in the last 3.5 years is try to show what President Obama's version of Yes, We Can look like when it comes to education. Okay, and so all you frustrated Democrats get together and form this thing, Democrats for Education Reform. How did it form? When did it form? How big is the organization, and how entrenched are you now in not only the national conversation, but in making things happen? Sure. It's when it began, it was a group of Democratic donors who were involved in politics first and got involved in education second, and started to see that a lot of the politicians that they've been supporting over the years, and the party itself that they had been supporting over the years, was not being very helpful on education issues, and was we'd become a party that was not only did we say no to things, we just wouldn't even allow things to get put on the table for discussions. we launched in New York in 2007. We're now in 10 states. Look, we try to raise money for politicians. Our starting point is that there's a political problem that surrounds the education problem, and until we deal with the political problem, we're not going to be able to solve the education problem.
What is the political problem?
It's that there are entrenched interests within public education which tend to dominate the discussions on education issues, such that we can't even we're not allowed to admit that there's a problem. So it's no wonder we're not allowed to talk about solutions.
Who are those interests?
It ranges in places. School boards, administrator associations, teacher unions, vendors that are have contracts with public school systems and are selling textbooks and tests and all this kind of stuff. It's a web that's really hard to untangle.
Okay. So Democrats for Education Reform in 10 states now, but you have a pretty good relationship and have been working journalistically and as an author and as an analyst in this field for quite some time, correct?
Yeah, we've been working.
Pretty connected, pretty networked in.
I try to make more friends than enemies.
Do you have a pretty good understanding of how the Obama administration ticks on this education thing?
We do. I mean, I think it's we've been look. Obama was sort of the poster child for us. Our organization started in New York City right at the time that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were battling it out on the fundraising part in early 2007 when they were going through my city, New York, trying to outraise each other. And Obama was the kind of guy that sort of pragmatic Democrat that we were looking for. We wanted to support champions like President Obama. And we've been encouraged that he's been trying to talk about he's been encouraging all of us nationwide to think much bigger about what's possible in public education, and then try to get everybody lined up on what it's going to take to get there.
Well, it's interesting because from my perspective in this microphone, I didn't vote for President Obama, and jury's out as to what the next couple of years hold. But people would suggest that he began on somewhat of a liberal philosophy. There's a lot of socialism complaint about health care reform and all that kind of stuff. But I always seem to say, when I'm referring to him in education matters, but on this one, he gets it. So whether you're on the Democratic side, the Republican side, the independent side, or whatever, there's a different tune being played by the Obama administration when it comes to education. And the Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, his former Chicago superintendent, and there's this thing about the Obama administration which seems to say, all right, ideology, philosophical, how we rebuild the nation's economy, this, that, and the other thing. Hey, I got 2 kids, and I get this education thing, and I've seen urban centers that just aren't performing, and I'm not going to take it anymore, right, and we're going to rebuild it. So I got to give this guy credit. It's the one thing, as the President of the United States, that I would have to say he's probably got universal, on-the-ground, gut-check support from America.
Agreed. I think this goes back to his days as a community organizer. He saw the end result of troubled education systems. So his starting point when he looks at education is that we've got a problem, not that it's everything is great except for some isolated issues.
Frankly, he hasn't sidestepped the issues or minced words. I think he has been pretty direct. There are those, of course, who think that we don't need a Department of Education, that we ought to just dump the whole idea. I'm not, even as a guy who thinks somewhat conservatively, I've never really bought into the notion that we shouldn't have national standards, that there shouldn't be some kind of national policy, that the country as a whole shouldn't be an entity that is performing better, right?
Right.
So that's kind of where that sits.
Yeah, he sort of brought a new vision for what the federal role can be in education as one of a pace setter.
So Democrats for Education Reform are up and running. You're making ground gains, I think, in terms of the conscience level of those who are concerned about education. Let me ask you this, because we're going to talk about Rhode Island a lot here, because that's what Joe is here for today. But it seems to me that even here in the state, we are seeing a fracture in the Democratic Party that is becoming more and more apparent even here in Rhode Island, where you've got elected officials, most of whom are Democrats
Right.
who are trying to make changes. A lot of them are in the form of mayors right now with this mayoral academy and this board and this coalition, if you will, of mayors who are trying to say, hey, there's another way of doing this. We saw a union here in Rhode Island that went left of the paradigm with Link Chafee and kind of, in many folks' minds, bought the election with a guy who seems to have no relationship to other Democrats here in the state. In other words, there seems to be almost a new Democratic Party being born from longtime Democrats who are sick and tired of not doing anything about education and confronting some of the challenges, including not limited to, but including the union behavior. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, and it's not just Rhode Island. This is happening all over the country. And one of the most interesting dynamics is the role that organized labor is playing. It's not that organized labor is all talking on the same page. And we're starting to see a lot more labor leaders sort of eyeing some of those sort of pragmatic reformer types like the mayors that you're talking about as people who may be onto something.
Not here.
Right.
Maybe elsewhere. But Rhode Island is Panasonic in reverse. Right. It's 20 years late on a lot of these concepts. Yet, thankfully, we do have some good thinkers who are trying to change that dynamic. Now, you had put out kind of a clarion call to this new administration to think about what they've been doing here in terms of race to the top and the formula. And we'll talk about that when we come back. Joe Williams is the executive director of Democrats for Education Reform. And I hope that he's got a couple of pills that would be bitter for us to swallow to offer here. It doesn't mean we have to choke on them, but we ought to be able to identify them. We'll be right back on the Dan Yorke Show. Stay with us. For Home Tech. Joe Williams is the executive director of Democrats for Education Reform. He's in Rhode Island today. Why don't we just kind of touch base before we get into big theories on Rhode Island? We touched base on what the politics of the Democratic Party here, I think, are becoming. I see a new breed, old players, new thinking, kind of coming out of the Democratic Party, which may be the split we need at some juncture. Democrats for Education Reform might encourage some of these Democratic coalition leaders, mayors and others, to more or less sign off on the labor unions if they don't want to cooperate in some kind of pragmatic fashion. Do you see that coming at some juncture? Literally, directly telling them to go kiss our royal rear ends.
With a little more finesse than that, I think. I mean, and I'll go back to Obama again, because I think Obama has been a pretty important player on this. I was at a fundraiser that he held in early 2007 in New York City, where a woman stood up and said, "I'm the principal of a charter school in New York, and I'm a Democrat. Why do we make it so hard within the Democratic Party to talk about this kind of stuff?" And Obama, a guy running for president in the United States, said, "Well, it's the teachers' union, and it's that they have historically had enormous influence over education policy discussions. In some cases for the right reasons, in other cases they've sort of taken the Democratic Party out of the game." What Obama said on that night was, "What our message has to be as forward-looking Democrats is that change is going to have to happen, and we want everybody on board for that change, but we can't wait around for everyone at the same time." Yeah. So it's really more of a decision for groups like union leaders to decide how fast they want to go along with this.
It's funny, Joe. You question my lack of finesse. You challenge my lack of finesse. It's not the first time that's happened here, and won't be the last. But I would offer you a friendly debate to suggest that here it's got to be a little bit tougher. It's got to be a little bit more direct. It's got to be a little bit more blue collar. It's got to be a little bit more, how would you say, down to earth. Because somehow the message hasn't gotten through that labor, specifically teacher unions in the state, have imploded the Democratic Party in this state. And that, well, imploded might be an overstatement, have separated. I mean, look what happened. The Democratic leader, despite his shove-it comments and things that caused at the end, was left alone. Frank Caprio, the treasurer, who was the odds-on favorite to win the governorship, was left alone. The Chafee campaign was co-opted. in many ways by labor. And I just think it's going to take some tough language. But semantics are not necessary to debate. Tell me what you're doing here in the state today, and then we'll talk about after 1 o'clock up until 1:30 when Joe's got to skedaddle to his itinerary. What are you doing here? What are you doing on our front porch today?
We're meeting with a number of legislative leaders just to check in with them. I've come up from time to time. It's not unusual for us to be running around the State House just and trying to keep tabs on things. Look, Rhode Island has always been interesting for us because it is a Democratic state. It's a kind of originally I think we looked at states like New York and California as being the kind of states where if you can change some of the politics on the ground there, it's going to have a broader effect nationwide. But Rhode Island, it's been interesting. I think as a state, particularly in the last 18 months, you guys got on the national map for really trying to rethink how it is that we should be doing public education. And we saw a lot of excitement in the eyes of elected leaders here in the past, and we kind of want to check the pulse and see where things are at with them and see if they're still committed to moving forward.
Why?
Look, Rhode Island's gotten a lot of traction. We'd like to see the traction continue. We'd like to see some of the forward-looking agenda that's been set here statewide to continue going on in the future.
And that's important to your organization because?
I think we really want to show at the end of the day that Democrats can take an issue like education and own it and show results at the end of the day.
So what are you trying to say? That Rhode Island is a concern for this more than fledgling organization known as Democrats for Education Reform because you need a couple of big wins, and this is a place where a big win could actually be a showcase and a prove it type of thing.
In any kind of movement, you need to show proof points that this that change is possible, and that look, we're trying to create a comfort zone for Democrats nationwide to say you can engage on these kind of issues, and you can get it's not only the right thing to do substance wise, but politically it works as well. And for us, it's precarious. We're involved in a lot of nasty battles on this stuff. Rhode Island being one place where we get involved in battles, and I think we want to make sure that that the reform side of the Democratic Party has got people in the game.
Define what a nasty battle looks like.
Changing policies, enacting policies, trying to hold back reforms or institute policies which will make reforms impossible to implement in the future.
You understand the political game.
Sure.
You've written about the political game. Are you instructing, tutoring, consulting players in the political game and the new think tankers that seem to want to come and all commiserate about their new way of thinking about education, about what the real battles are like in the barrels or the bowels, if you will, of a state house to win progress? I mean, are you doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, at times. As you point out, there's a lot of different actors that are involved, a lot of different players, and it's it's difficult on our side of and when I say our side, I'm talking about the polite debate that plays out within the Democratic Party. It's hard getting all the people on our side of that debate to be focused, but that's something that we work on, and we try to work on with other groups to try to understand what kind of battle are we in, and are we using all the tools that we've got to try to win.
We'll talk about those tools. Joe Williams is Executive Director of Democrats for Education Reform. I'm kind enough to share an hour with us. He'll be here till 1:30, and we'll come back right after the 1 o'clock news and talk about what that battle is right here in Rhode Island and what our governor's pause on this could mean. Stay with us.
This is the show of record on Rhode Island's station of record, The Dan Yorke Show on News Talk 630 WPRO and 99.7 FM.
All righty. Our final hour of the broadcast, we're going to spend another half hour with Joe Williams, Executive Director of the Rhode Island, the Democrats for Education Reform. Is there a real viable Rhode Island chapter, by the way?
Who's
the
we don't have a full-time staff person here, but it's but we maintain a political action committee and try to keep it stocked. If anybody's interested in contributing, you can contact us on dfer.org. We could use your help.
At dfer.org, you'll learn more about the organization, its mission statement, which I think is quite powerful. Take a look at it. But for all intents and purposes, you're Democrats who have finally said, why are we doing this to ourselves in the education conversation? For the new listeners out there, again, give us a 30-second synopsis of what this Democrats for Education Reform are all about.
It is a group of Democrats who feel like our starting point is that we think the public education ought to be a lot better than it is today, and that it's going to take a battle at times within the Democratic Party if we're ever going to get there. It's an education problem that's surrounded by a political problem, and we're trying to focus on the political problem.
All right. Now, you're here in Rhode Island. You're meeting and greeting and making this a project. How often are you here, by the way?
I come about every 6 weeks or so.
Right.
I'm a board member of an organization, actually the Rhode Island Mayoral Academies, and we've got our monthly board meetings, and I don't get to all of them, but I try to get up here as often as I can.
All right. Well, we know the Rhode Island Mayoral Academies are about a different kind of charter school idea. If you talk to some of the movers and shakers, including Cumberland Mayor Dan McKee, who kind of began this concept, he will take umbrage with the idea that they are charter schools. What he is saying is that they are public schools of a different flavor, operating under a different paradigm of rules.
Right.
You see it the same way?
Absolutely. And we I mean, that's the reason that my organization got involved in Rhode Island, I think, was through the work that Mayor McKee began there. We saw that he understood that the charter laws and the Rhode Island Mayoral Academy law is not an end in itself, but it's a means. It's a way to get some of the best operators on the East Coast, school operators on the East Coast, to come into Rhode Island and raise the bar.
You say charter or now Mayoral Academy to a union leader, it is like kryptonite to Superman.
Sure.
They go nuts. They will talk all about the special rules, and if we had the special rules, then we would.
We agree with the union on that. We would love to give more flexibility to public school systems.
They argue against themselves. Finishing the point, they'll talk about the special rules that the charter or academy schools are allowed to operate under, and then you say, yeah, guess what? The reason why the mainstream public schools don't operate under those rules is because you set them. Right?
Yeah,
you have collectively bargained everything, including how much time one can go to the bathroom in a public school. You have set the rules, and then you complain that the other schools, without your formal relationship, are operating outside the rules that you set to lower the bar. It's amazing.
Agreed. And that's our starting point on this, is that there ought to be a better way to do public education than we generally do. And what we like about some of the experiments out there, like Rhode Island Mayoral Academies, is that it's one way to show that things could be different and the world will not end. And that's and we think we need more of those out there as things that we can point to say, look, there's got to be more rational ways to deliver public education.
3 of the 4 gubernatorial candidates in our campaign season looked at the education reforms, and we got some new kneecap scores here today that show some marginal signs of improvement. We've got an education commissioner who is pretty respected and who came in here as a change agent, hasn't gotten everything she wants, but is trying to move the ball forward. And 3 of the 4 gubernatorial candidates more or less looked at the education question as almost check. In other words, we got big problems. We got big pension problems. We got big balancing the budget problems. We got big infrastructure problems. We got all those kinds of things going on. We need economic development. We got to work on that. What about education? Oh, no, that GIS is pretty good. Check.
Right.
Not that the deal was done or the work was accomplished, but that the systems were in place. We've got university heads right now who are kind of change agents and movers and shakers. And we've got some new thinkers on the superintendency level. Some, not many, but some. And we've got this new ed commissioner who's really trying to drive that ship, and she's chipping away and actually having a couple of union wins. And so these 3 or 4 candidates, more or less, said, pretty good. Let's just let her keep doing her thing, except for one, and he won with 36% of the vote. And now 65% of the electorate and probably 80% of the movers and shakers in this state are all staring at each other thinking, what are we going to do now? He's going to stop everything. He wants to take a thoughtful pause on things like charter schools, which are elemental to this illustrious Race to the Top award that Rhode Island got at $75 million. Enough of the speech from me. What the hell is the truth. And tell me how connected you are to the truth in Washington about how in jeopardy this race to the top money really is.
I mean, it's hard to answer how connected question, and we try to communicate as often as we can with members of the administration who are active in this. Look, we're taking the Obama administration at their word on this, on the whole race to the top thing, and that they intend to hold the winning states to what they said they were going to do. That there's not a lot of room for bait and switch. So. They will not disperse money to states unless states show that they're living up to the commitments that they've made in their applications. And look, it's not to say that this is an all or nothing game. There's probably room for some negotiations, but I think if there are signs coming from a state that they are no longer interested in living up to an application that they put in a competitive process, I think it's going to be very difficult for the state to justify getting the money to roll. And these are tough times. The whole point of the race to the top in the first place was to try to see from the federal level whether states and districts would think about changing education in ways that they hadn't before. We learned under No Child Left Behind that when the federal government told states and districts you had to do something, you had to follow a cookie-cutter approach, that states and districts generally said, we're not interested. In this case, the federal government sort of said, here's some money, put your best application in and tell us what you would do with this. And we're not going to tell you. Tell us what you're going to do as a state, and we'll decide some winning states and we'll award grants. So Rhode Island put together a great package. And our concern right now is that if there is a perception that the state is backtracking on what it said it was going to do, that there's significant amounts of money at stake here for Rhode Island's public schools.
Well, you put out a press release a couple of weeks back that said Chafee's, quote, thoughtful pause, end quote, on charters jeopardizes race to the top funding. Now, you've got an organizational credibility that you've got to recognize. When you suggest that this is a jeopardized winning grant, how credible is your intelligence on that?
We have checked with the administration. We've checked with the Department of Education to see, not just for Rhode Island, but for several states, if states were not going to live up to what they said they were going to do in their applications. Is the federal government going to live up to its pledge not to award those states the money? And this is supposed to be a contest, and like I said, there's no room for bait and switch. And they assured us that money will not be dispersed unless states are showing that they're doing what they said they were going to do.
Now, look, Rhode Island has got the attention of Democrats for Education Reform, your organization. We're talking about Joe Williams, the executive director. It also caught the attention of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Education. The Central Falls debacle with some of the reform measures that were, by the way, illustrated by the Department of Education. Here are the 4 options you have to reform your school system. Down to the states, the commissioner takes the format, turns it around to Central Falls. Central Falls picks one. All hell breaks loose. National attention on the threat to let 100 teachers go, whatever. They work it all out. But it's not like they're not paying attention to the state of Rhode Island. So how in touch is the Secretary of Education himself, Arne Duncan? Do you speak with him? Do you know whether he and or his high subordinates are really looking at saying, guess what, game over, clock ran out, you guys didn't live up to your obligations in the application, your new governor's thoughts don't match ours, no money?
I know that they're looking at every winning state, and they want to make a clear case that they are holding the winning states to their feet to the fire.
And how long does that reflect on the actual cash disbursements that go along with some of these reforms?
I mean, it's very much, and it's not just the current process. This administration is arguing right now to Congress that they would like to do future race to the top type contests in the future. What's at stake here is not just reform in Rhode Island or reform in places like Washington, D.C. or New York where the similar issues are being raised. It's about the entire integrity of the race to the top contest. Either it's a contest where you award the best states for things or it's not. And if we go forward and states that have won put together ambitious packages but then backtrack on them, the entire idea of the contest falls apart.
When's the first big chunk of dough supposed to come here? Do you know?
I mean, states can start withdrawing it at whatever point they feel is right. When
so
they can
it's
start
sitting
showing
there in
process.
an account.
Right. The states can start to draw down on it, and in order to do so,
have we
show
drawn
that
down on it?
I don't know. My understanding is that Rhode Island has not, but I don't know. That's a several weeks old, that information.
Well, it'd be nice to talk to the education commissioner about the drawdown, but of course she is abiding by the talk radio ban you may have heard about here. Another one of the challenges that we have to try to facilitate information for people. But that's something that we'll check on. Bottom line is you withdraw the money or you let the money sit. If you're not abiding by the application, you will have to remit the money back, maybe with interest, for God's sake. I mean, there are legal issues here.
Yeah,
correct?
What the Secretary of Staff has pointed out on this is that no one showed up with a giant, larger-than-life check and brought it to Rhode Island and said, here, go and cash it and use it. I mean, this is a process that is going to continue to play out as states draw down on the winnings.
So, in other words, progress will be measured, agreements will be monitored, and successes will have to be tracked to keep the flow moving, correct?
Correct.
All right. Do you think that the Chafee administration understands that? And better yet, do you think they care?
I don't know. I haven't spent time with the Chafee administration on this, so I don't know whether they care or not. I think that there's.
Are you looking to get some intelligence on that as you continue to spend time here?
Absolutely. But these kind of issues. I mean, this is none of this is necessarily black and white. A lot of this plays out in the gray area. These issues around race at the top and what is required, what is advisory, all this kind of stuff has played out since they announced it. So for 2 years, there's been lots of it's a new process for everyone, and I think. In some cases, it's the issues that are popping up right now in states like Rhode Island that are actually going to test it and will sort of drive some of the policies that the department comes up with. Because this is about the integrity of an entire federal competitive grant process at a time when this administration is really hanging its hat on the success of this in terms of getting states to enact education reform legislation around the country. It is a time where the education reformers nationwide have to hold this president's feet to the fire and making sure that he lives up to what he says he was going to do with Race to the Top.
I would imagine that states who competed and did not earn grants are going to be very closely monitoring the promises made by places like Rhode Island to earn the grants.
Absolutely.
And there'd be litigation that could occur to say, hey, well, wait a second. We didn't get the money because you didn't think we were as good as Rhode Island was. Rhode Island promised to do X, and then they didn't do it. And what? Right? I mean, so there's quite a dilemma that the administration has, isn't there?
There could be losing states. Colorado comes to mind right off the bat that could make a case that when all is said and done, they will have enacted far more ambitious education reform agenda, and yet they were not selected as winners in the Race to the Top.
Do you think the Obama administration is paying attention to the details like the change of complexion of the Board of Regents?
I do, and that's why I think that this is not just about a pause on charter schools. This is about the signals that Rhode Island is sending back to Washington that it's either in the game or not, and I think it's all part of a larger message that the state is sending. Whether it thinks it's sending it or not, it is.
What do you think it's being received as? What do you think that message is that's being received? I think
there is a huge question mark right now, whereas a year ago, there was a lot of excitement about the potential for pragmatic, Democratic-led change in a state like Rhode Island. The verdict is out right now about whether that's going to continue to happen.
A feeling like Rhode Island's off the reservation type of thing?
Not yet. I think people are wondering whether it's headed that way and quickly.
The change in the Board of Regents with some of the players that inspired Deborah Gist to come in here, soon to be, if he doesn't get it already, the governor, it will be a brewing controversy over the nature of the chairman's decision. An active lobbyist who then becomes appointed or nominated to an appointment. I have suggested to people on both the regents' appointments and even the chair's appointment that they get to their senators and stop the hearings, slow the hearing process down, see if you can stop it there. You've written on the politics of education. This stuff matters, right? The mechanics of some would say it's playing dirty. See, what happens with wonky types, you're not one of them because I think you get both sides, but I get wonky types in here who are all really cool and really very policy astute and really, 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 really good thinkers about, the way it ought to be. And then they're going to get their pants taken off them because in the bowels of where it all happens in a state house, they got beat.
Right.
Are you coming in here to explain to the people who are on your team or in your thinking process that it's about time to start tying down some legislators and, threatening some political lives here to be able to stop the process that Link Chafee is trying to engage in?
We're still feeling out some of these appointments and try to see exactly where it is that we stand. Like I think it's a.
But war is this has got to be at some juncture. Someone's going to have to declare war.
But that's the key, is knowing at what point it's time to jump in and push the button. And I'm not quite sure we're there yet. I think everybody's concerned. I think a lot of the people on the reform side are watching this very closely. So it's not like people are just sort of sitting back and not poised to do something. It is going to take a lot of convincing, though, that it's a battle. It's these political fights are all about power.
Your take on the education commissioner is?
She's a friend, and I've been impressed with how she's operated.
Her national reputation would be?
She is seen as a thoughtful, pragmatic leader who sort of has a vision for where this could be going, and is doing her best to implement it.
Well, she's diplomatically shared and politically, along with the former governor, I think done a very good job of including a large amount of diverse people in the stakeholdership of the application. She still is the architect. She's viewed that way nationally, correct?
Yes.
And by the administration?
Absolutely.
So if Lane Chafee comes in, stops the presses, gets influenced by whatever political influence he's gotten, and her progress is stopped, it will be no blemish on her opportunity to seek some kind of change agency elsewhere, would it?
No, I would think it would not. I think it also, though, because she's sort of a barometer of sorts, and a lot of the attention that Rhode Island has gotten, and since she's gotten here, is because of her work. It's going to combine with the that question mark is going to start to look a lot more like an answer that Rhode Island is no longer in the game on education.
So at the end of the day, if we have not that nobody is irreplaceable in any role, I think we've all learned that with the human condition. People and talent matter. Projects that are ongoing matter. Management matters. And delays and steps backwards happen based on the people and the players in the game. Correct?
Yeah, it is. And this is not about Deb Gist. This is about how all of the factors in this equation come together, and it's one more very clear one that a lot of people are going to understand.
Well, it seems to me that at the top of the argument is the mayoral academies and the charters and the commitment to charters and the application, but there's so much more. Teacher mentoring, teacher evaluation, all these things that are just being fought by the unions, and even the three-tier diploma discussion, which he stepped away from, but this testing issue and all of these things that hold people accountable and measure. All these measurements are part of the application and part of the ability to actually get that money flowing here for change. If those measurements and those processes stop or are politically opposed or go south, so goes the whole shooting match, correct?
It is, yep. And it sends the message again throughout the state that you needn't worry about anybody talking about doing reform, because nobody's going to take it seriously. Again, it's going to be like, yeah, here comes somebody else with a new plan, and we've heard it before, so let's just duck and wait it out and watch other states do what they're going to do. All
right. Well, I hope you'll be a source of intelligence and guidance for us. If you had 10 seconds to tell people in Rhode Island here what they should be doing, what does Joe Williams, Executive Director of the Democrats for Education Reform, tell them?
You can't sit back. You can't sit back and assume that education is going to be treated like a priority. You've got to make your voice heard. A lot of people do not like conflict. They don't like noise. But this is politics. Noise is what matters.
Thanks for coming.
You bet. Good
Go
to see
get
you.
him up at the State House. Joe Williams. All right. Headlines next, and we'll talk about this visit at 438 WPRO on the Dan Yorke Show. Stay with us.